Hello, I'm Nene Spivy, the Executive Director of the Children's Science Center. Welcome and thank you for your interest in our community conversations. This community conversation in November 2020 begins our series discussing the importance of creating a vibrant STEM ecosystem for Northern Virginia. As we're working to build a world-class science center, we're conscious of the important role we play in partnership with schools, universities, industry partners, and families. To kick off this series and begin defining the needs of our STEM ecosystem, I'm joined by two members of the Center's Board of Directors, the Honorable Regina Schofield, Director of Corporate Engagement and Education Outreach at Battelle, and Dr. Jim Egenreider, Engineering and Education Research Faculty and the Director of the K-12 STEM Education and Workforce Development Programs at Virginia Tech. In her current position, Regina directs Battelle's regional philanthropy, focusing on funding innovative STEM education and outreach programs that bolster tomorrow's workforce. Previously, Regina worked with the Casey Family Programs on national public policy for children and families and served as the Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice and the White House liaison at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Jim is a teacher, professor, researcher, scientist, engineer, and a farmer. At Virginia Tech, he develops partnerships engaging regional school systems, higher education, nonprofits, chambers of commerce, and industry leaders. He's also on the faculty of Virginia Tech's Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability, President Emeritus of the Washington Academy of Sciences, and an educator in residence at the NIA Center for Integrative STEM, a consortium of 8 Tier 1 research universities. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation.
Regina, I'd love to turn it to you and sort of ask the same question, but more from an industry perspective. How does industry and how do companies like Battelle play a role in creating a vibrant ecosystem for STEM?
So I will say that when we started really thinking about supporting a school back in Columbus, Ohio, around 2007, 2008, we actually started with two partners. One was the university, Ohio State University, and then the Franklin County School Systems, which is where Columbus, Ohio is. And when you built that, like everybody thinks of bricks and mortars when you're first starting a school. We actually borrowed space. Actually, Ohio State kind of gave us space, I should say, not borrowed. And then when you think about the students and the teachers, how do you support them? And really getting further into what is it that the school district needed from us in order to have really great outcomes for students. That was a great experiment. Graduation rate was really high when I started at Battelle 2010. It was the first year the class had, it's 2006, the class had actually graduated, I think, all but one student graduated, and that student in May or June, and then the one student graduated in August and went to the military. So that's what really got us on the board in the DC area. Jim was a forerunner to some of that work before we got, they asked us, hey, in DC public schools, will you help us with this Race to the Top grant? And in that Race to this Top grant, we said, they said, we want a really successful STEM high school. And my take on it was that you don't really want one successful STEM high school in a city like DC. So what can we do to help you create a more vibrant system? And we weren't thinking ecosystems. I mean, with Jim's vast background, he probably picked up on that really early on and could have said to me in 2010, you're creating an ecosystem. We were really thinking about how do you successfully stand up something in a public school system and use all of the resources in that. And you can't just depend on one business partner because that's not sustainable. And it really was thinking about how can you think about how to outreach to more businesses than just one. But it's not just businesses. It is those community college partnerships. It's those higher education partnerships. The libraries are a vibrant piece of that. And so one by one, when you really start thinking about those partners, before you've done it, if you're really thinking about successful student outcomes and successful teacher professional development, you've built up an ecosystem without thinking about applying that word to it. And for me, it's like not a bubble, because that, when you think of a bubble, it's like everything that's encased inside. But more of a system where everything, like all the tentacles are sort of connected. And so like looking at something like in the nature, like it's all connected, right? So that to me is like a successful and vibrant system. And when I look at Jim, I think he's an ecosystem in himself because of all the systems that he's connected, intentionally or unintentionally. But that's what makes you have a successful STEM program, and why I think we can get there in the Northern Virginia region.
Yeah, that there's so much there, Regina, that you've said to unpack. It's I think though the connections and the cross connections are, and the sort of the network kind of concept of everything flowing across and between the different elements of an ecosystem is really powerful, And I know, Jim, I know even in our case with the Science Center, we had a number of needs in some of our youth development programs. And so we worked with some folks at Virginia Tech and Falls Church, and your team and other teams helped in a variety of ways, whether it was with 3D printing workshops or the Think a Bit lab that you all created for hands-on experiences in STEM. And maybe you can speak a bit to sort of some of those connections that Virginia Tech has made with others in this area to further STEM.
Well, I'll maybe even speak from a larger context and how a lot of these really great programs came to be. Many of you probably know that the STEM acronym was created here in Northern Virginia back in 2001. And so there was some local energy here because of the proximity of National Science Foundation, of course, as well as DARPA. But all of this sort of coincided in the early 2000s with the concern around US performance in the PISA, which is stands for Program for International Student Assessment or School Assessment, I'm not sure. And then TIMSS, which is Trends in International Math and Science Scores. And US was notably underperforming according to the metrics that were used there. So that led to this investment between the universities, the schools, the community college, and then of course the community itself. And NOVA stepped forward then again in 2006, 2007, and with Arlington, Loudoun, and Virginia Tech, NOVA received the first 2 of 7 Governor STEM Academies in Northern Virginia. They got a lot of support from regional chambers and the Northern Virginia Technology Council. And at the time, by the way, they were called Career and Technical Academies, but now they're all called STEM Academies. And they had this big emphasis on STEM education and career pathways. And I think that workforce connection really changed everything. People started to realize that the exposures had to begin in pre-K when we started preparing students for success in their English language arts, math, and computational skills, and continued right up through retirement. And I think it's even more important now when we realize that today's 5th graders will probably be working maybe beyond 2072 and 2073 when they would normally retire, because a current 5th grader is predicted to live beyond 100 years old. So who knows when work years will end at that point. So this initiative has really become much broader than just the universities. We did have a head start here in Northern Virginia, but we also have a lot of challenges, and I want to talk about that later when we talk about the role of the museum.
Sure. I'd like to shift a little bit back to some things that you were touching on, Regina, in terms of, what you were talking a lot about, sort of what some of those success factors or success metrics were that you were looking to achieve in Ohio and in DC and what have you. And and maybe it's more though looking at it today, what are some of the needs and gaps that you've seen in your work in our area with respect to, having this vibrancy of a STEM ecosystem? Where do we need to make sure we go to get this right?
I think in our region, going back to that one STEM school, when you look at Northern Virginia, you think, well, there's the Thomas Jefferson High School, right? And so therefore we don't really need anything else. And so, in part of my role at Battelle, I hand out grants to programs outside of Central Ohio because we have a huge presence here in the DC area. And one of the things that I noticed in working with DC government is that, it made me really think about what was going on in Northern Virginia, is that there are a lot of schools that start from a deficit point of view. A lot of those kids are on free and reduced lunch. And so the school systems get so caught up in, it's hard enough for me to feed the child, and they don't really think about educating the whole child. And STEM to me is a holistic approach. I happen to believe that everything is STEM, which is what I'm so excited about. I'm excited about the lab that we have now, but I'm really excited about the bigger museum because you can see all of those interconnections. And it just makes you realize that the vibrancy that I talked about in an ecosystem is really outside of our front door when you look at nature and how things kind of really flow together and just work together, whether it's, and I couldn't argue this with an expert like Jim, but to me, like, in my head, it's like really thinking about birding and biology and trees and growing my garden, and all of those things to me are part of nature and is part of a STEM ecosystem that begins at home, right? And so when we look at it, I think looking at it from not just the gaps of in an education system where there are kids that have more needs than others, and there's a lot of inequity in every school system, especially in Northern Virginia, because we don't see those pockets. Kids that don't have as much are almost invisible in an area like this because there are those of us that have so much. We think everybody else has the same sort of resources that we do. So that's, to me, is a challenge, not just in DC, but certainly in our area. But the other part is almost forgetting about that parent as part of that ecosystem. And it is so important for us to have higher ed support. But when Jim talks about kindergarten and that entry of being STEM, it almost begins at home with play, natural play for kids at a really early age and getting their hands dirty like we used to, and making, I'm really going to date myself here, mud pies for those of us that were able to do that a long time ago. Watching your grandparents plant things, but even cooking is part of that STEM process. And so there are so many more opportunities for us to be organic in that process. And that we sort of forget about it. So we think, hey, we got this really successful high school here in Northern Virginia, and it meets everybody else's needs. But we should be thinking about having those resources available for everybody in all schools. And to Jim's point, in preschool, because a lot of us used preschool, and you want to make sure that it's more than just a place to just drop your kid off where somebody keeps their diapers dry all day. You want them to be learning and engaged. And so being active at every stage of the process, I think, helps us as we get older to think about that whole world and the integration. So I'm sorry I'm using my hands so much, but that's like how I, like with STEM, I'm like this hands-on person. I couldn't wait to I saw Laura say her kids play mud pies. So for me, it's always like this interactive process for myself, and I want it to be for everybody else as well. And too often in school, it's about kids staying in seats, and we really ought to give them an opportunity to get up and get engaged and to be able to have something like the museum at their disposal every day in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I think that you've touched on so many important points, and parents need help. I mean, it's not, I think and educators need help and making STEM exciting and fun. And those hands-on opportunities, interactive opportunities to reinforce, how amazing our world is, how science is everything and everywhere. I also want to ask the same question to Jim. What do you see as sort of the needs and gaps that we need to meet that are unique to our area?
Regina hit all of the big ones. And when you start looking at how the schools are trying to fix it, you realize they've got challenges that maybe cannot be fixed in school, and rely on these out of school opportunities. And one problem now is that science is no longer assessed in the third grade. And I'm not a fan of high stakes exams that influence school funding priorities and things like that. But we noticed that as soon as that standard of learning assessment was withdrawn in third grade, many schools stopped teaching science until fourth and fifth grades. So that was a big problem. We also see a lot of variance in elementary teachers' confidence in science, technology, and engineering. And the schools are doing a very good job about taking those teachers who've become either self-identified leaders or exemplars and getting them out there in front of other teacher audiences. But there's still a lot of room for that kind of professional development. There are really big problems with the middle school calendar. Right now, it is nearly impossible for a music student to take a computer science or engineering class. Just no room. It's impossible. They might be part of a sixth grade wheel or a seventh grade wheel, but that usually doesn't work. So Regina mentioned under-resourced schools, and I think we actually suffer as a region because when allocations are made based on Department of Labor data, they overlook the problem we have where our school population is often very different when you look at the region as a whole. So, you know, we have zip codes in which there are 8-to-1 ratios of households to households with children in schools. So for every household with a kid in school, there are 7 that don't, and they might be double income attorneys for all we know. And it really skews the numbers. So our region doesn't qualify for certain support from the federal government as well. We struggle with liberal arts education. I think when, you know, probably about 30 years ago, liberal arts started, it used to be this really wonderful collection of all disciplines and exposures to all disciplines. And it sort of became all disciplines except the technical ones. And now I think they're doing a little bit better job. They have liberal art, or they have math for liberal arts students and science for liberal arts students, but it's not what it could be or used to be. We still have celebrities and news anchors saying things like, I'm not good at math. And I hope everyone on this call, if you ever hear anybody say, I'm not good at math, act like they just said, I can't read. Just say, oh my gosh, how can I help you? We can meet once a week. And they'll sort of say, I didn't really mean it that way. And then so stop saying that. It's really a bad example for kids. We have overloaded guidance counselors, and then we have guidance counselors who are afraid to tell parents about some of these hands-on technical courses that they have. Fortunately, those same parents are going to start looking for opportunities like the ones we're creating at the museum. And then back to just one thing about equity. If you talk to any of the equity and excellence coordinators in our schools, they will say our schools do very well with white and Asian girls and very poorly with Black and Latino boys. The biggest gap is Black and Latino boys. And that is a big area I hope our museum could act on.
This is really great to hear from both of you on all of these areas. It's always exciting to think about the possibilities when there's problems, right? These are all the possibilities of how we can get it right going forward. So on that note, I think I want to also pivot back and ask, what do you think is our greatest opportunity here in Northern Virginia for creating a vibrant STEM ecosystem? I'm going to pitch back to Regina.
I think the greatest opportunity is when we think about us in the future in terms of what would bring everybody to Northern Virginia, right, and make it a world-class museum. That's almost an easier vision for us, right? This beam, this spotlight on the Concourse site, and I have to bring in the Heron Fest and all the things that have drawn people in the region to visit the spot from thus far. But it is the opportunity to fill those gaps that you just talked about, right? Because when we think about the ecosystem, it is absolutely marvelous that the state of Virginia has supported us and the governor's given us money in his budget. It makes it a lot easier to raise money and get to that gap that Jen and her team is trying to get to, right? But it is, once we build that resource, what's that opportunity for us? And it is actually to to me, it's like spackling in those gaps, right? Because the kids that are being left out of, that don't find rote lessons exciting when they go to school, this is an opportunity for us to engage every school district in the region and give those kids something to look forward to, and expose the teachers to an opportunity, because the teachers are also looking for a way, they're in a classroom and they're teaching to an SOL and they know that a student isn't getting it. It's not because of them. To me, it's like what they've been handed down to teach to the student, going back to what Jim said about teaching to the test, right? And so therefore, what's the opportunity for us to be able to spackle in those gaps so that we are part of a vibrant ecosystem with those teachers and are able to reach those students in ways that they haven't been able to before. Because those kids are there, to me, their brains are laying dormant. They're just waiting for an opportunity. In the old days, maybe it would have been throwing taking apart a transistor radio and putting that together. And actually, I have a friend who was disappointed that his son wasn't interested in baseball. And I said, oh, well, what's he interested in? He's like, oh, he takes computers apart and puts them together. And I literally said, you're an idiot. You should let your son tear apart computers and put them together, because, let somebody else do baseball. Because this kid, I'm serious, he was doing this at 8 years old. And so I said, don't stifle his innovation, because I wouldn't dream of touching a computer and taking it apart. All I want to do is to put my power plug in and have my computer work and me do what I need to do. That's as far as I want to go with computers. But it is an opportunity for us to engage those students and make them feel innovative about the world around them. And I do think we will be so successful when we do that. We'll be grounded and rooted in different ways in the community, but also globally, but making sure that whatever we're doing, we're touching kids where they are and meeting them in that space that's a natural fit for them, which means that they'll be that organic thinking will come out of that process that they've been able to engage with. And the museum will be a fond place for them, but a fonder place when they're able to go back to the classroom and learn how to not just do, Jim talked about the application, that application of math and application of science, that application of technology, that application of STEM, because it's around us and available for each one of us, and for certainly the kids that are in our lives, so they can grow up and continue to want to touch things and be innovative.
Can I expand on that, Nene?
Please.
Those are terrific points. And it reminds me, there was a report by the National Academies back in 2013 that said STEM resilience, the notion that every kid thinks she or he is an artist and a scientist until some adult tells them they're not, is a problem of resilience. How do we get kids past their first bad science fair experience or their first algebra experience in some cases? And they came up with 3 points. One was highly engaging curricula in the schools, of course. The other was after school clubs and activities. And then the third was Saturday and summer camps. And you can see that the museum could be effective in all 3 of those: developing curricula, providing these after school, out of school opportunities. And I think we could add 2 more that I'm very fond of promoting. And one is simply early, not just early, maybe earliest exposures. So that, and maybe the thing that museums can do that schools cannot is family experiences, where the whole family experiences it together. And then the last one I would add to that list of 3, now 4, would be a 5th. And that is building varied, defined pathways from middle school to careers, recognizing that we can't just have 5 pathways. We have to have 5,000 pathways that a student can navigate. We think way too often that middle school students just start to see a vision and they follow it, but we're regularly surprised as educators how much hand-holding, guidance, and direct information they need. And then just a little bit more on equity. Equity has replaced the word that we used to use, equality, but equity needs to evolve too. It can't just be invitations and equitable opportunities that we provide for all underrepresented groups, but really we have to arrive at a place or a time when there is an expectation that all of these groups will be at the table or be in every classroom or be in every course that's offered.
That's a wealth of capability that we have to tap into. I often think that the intellectual capital in the DMV is just unbelievable when you think of all the, whether it's these professional associations and academies, industry, agencies. It's really, there's so much potential, and yet there's so many kids and families and schools that need more exposure, more access to these meaningful experiences. And it's certainly, there's plenty to get done in the future. I think both of you have alluded to sort of the Science Center's role in this effort, and I think we've certainly covered that well. And it is really exciting to think about it in terms of the whole child, and that holistically and starting early. And I realized when you said that, Jim, that I didn't even explain our early learners and early family gallery at the Future Science Center, but we're really excited. I mean, that's been our bread and butter, and we're keeping up with that going into the new Science Center. It's going to be really a fun place for children to have their first exposures to STEM and with family. And there definitely is great research on how family learning is very impactful in shaping interests and attitudes. So there's a lot there.
Thank you, Regina and Jim, for leading an engaging conversation. It was truly a privilege to discuss the complexities and the boundless possibilities of creating a robust STEM ecosystem in Northern Virginia. It's clear that the foundation for the ecosystem is strong within our region, and the Future Science Center will play a role that strengthens it only further. I hope you enjoyed this first conversation in our series and invite you to learn more about the Children's Science Center's mission and our vision to build Northern Virginia's Science Center at www.childsci.org. On behalf of the children and families in our region, thank you.